Thank you to everyone who's joined us for today's webinar, which is Translating Research into Design Opportunities. I'm Fiona Cromwell. I'm the Digital Communications Manager at Designability. If you'd like to, please share who you are and where you're joining us from in the chat box. You'll also find a link to the live captioning in the chat box too, if you need it. This session will be sharing the work we've been doing as part of the National Centre for Accessible Transport in partnership with disabled people across the UK. Our aim was to understand the real experiences of public transport and translate that understanding into clear, evidence-based opportunities for improvement. So a few housekeeping bits and pieces before we get started. This webinar is being recorded. It will last approximately 45 minutes. Participants are on mute. You can choose show captions to see the subtitles or click the link in the chat box, as I mentioned. There will also be a link to the live captioning shared. I've put on here, please choose Q&A, but we've seemed to have lost that box. So if you do have any questions as you're watching the presentation, please also put those into the chat box and we will pick those up as we go along. And if we don't have time to respond to all questions, including the ones that were submitted in advance when you registered, we will get back to you after the webinar has finished. A link to the copy of all of these slides and the recording will be emailed to you once the session has ended. So for those of you who don't know about us, we are Designability. We're a UK charity that enables disabled people to live with greater independence. We follow a human-centered design approach to create products with and for disabled people to improve and enrich their lives. Our work focuses on the design, creation and provision of products that increase independence for disabled people. So this isn't just about products that people need, but also products that they want to use. Although there might be other options available, they might not be easy to use or access, and they might not be products that people would actually choose to have themselves. We deliver choice by involving disabled people across our organisation and throughout the design process to create innovative product solutions not available elsewhere. So just to introduce our speakers today, we're joined by Alessia Zagonic, who is our product experience designer, and Keir Haynes, our design innovation manager. Alessia and Keir will talk you through what we learned, the design opportunities that emerged, and how they can help guide meaningful change across the transport sector. This main presentation you're about to see has been pre-recorded, but they are both live on the call today, and they will be ready to answer your questions once the presentation has ended. So without further ado, we'll get started.
So what is ncat? ncat is the National Centre for Accessible Transport. Founded in 2023, it is an evidence centre with a mission to create a barrier-free transport system. The guiding principle of ncat is that disabled people are involved in every stage of understanding transport challenges and shaping solutions. The consortium brings together specialist organisations that take a whole systems approach to addressing the accessibility needs of disabled people in transport. By working in partnership, they co-develop solutions and evidence to make transport more inclusive and equitable. Funded by the Motability Foundation, ncat consortium members include Coventry University, UK charities Designability and the Research Institute for Disabled Consumers, as well as organisations with expertise in transport design, planning, commissioning and policy, Connected Places Catapult, Policy Connect and WSP Future Mobility Team. So who is this webinar for? This webinar is for anyone who has a role in shaping how public transport is designed, delivered or experienced. This includes policymakers, transport operators, manufacturers of vehicles and infrastructure, digital services, local authorities, as well as organisations working alongside disabled people. The aim today is to share findings in a way that helps all of us identify where change is possible and how we can move towards solutions that break down barriers together. In this webinar, we'll start with why this work was needed, its purpose, briefly talk through the key activities we completed with disabled people and the approach we took. We'll then share what we learned and introduce 8 clear design opportunities that came out of this research. We'll then look at these opportunities through the lens of a typical bus journey, because that's where we see some of the most immediate and impactful change. Finally, we'll talk about what happens next and how we see this work being used and built upon. But why did we do this work? We began this work because disabled people continue to face barriers throughout their journeys, and these aren't only physical access. They include uncertainty, a lack of clear information, social pressures, and environments and transport vehicles that don't adapt to meet their needs. These barriers affect confidence, independence, and the ability to travel with dignity. We wanted to understand more about these experiences directly from disabled travellers across different types of public transport in day-to-day life. And why now? This project builds directly on NCAT's transport barriers research that was published last year, which gave us a clear picture of where barriers exist for disabled people when using public transport. The aim of this project was to dig a little deeper into those challenges, explore them further with disabled people, to understand more about their impact, what might change, and how this could be achieved, with direct challenges to the public transport sector framed as design opportunities. The opportunity was to move from identifying barriers to shaping practical, human-centred design opportunities for specific aspects of travel for disabled people. And how is this work different? The goal for this project was to move from generating the evidence that describes and explains barriers for disabled people towards framing opportunities for improvement. This work involved direct engagement with disabled people to understand their experiences in real depth. We then translated these insights into practical design opportunities. These opportunities are not solutions, but clear starting points for change. They describe what needs to improve, who's affected, and where design, service, or system changes can make a difference. They're intended for those that have a role in creating and adopting new solutions that will ultimately remove barriers for disabled people. I'll now hand over to Alessia for this next section.
Thank you, Kier. I'm going to tell you what we did, how we did it, and what we found out. To start with, we looked through the existing research to identify what we're going to focus on. At this point, not only physical barriers, but also the ones related to sensory environments, information availability, and barriers in planning and navigating journeys emerged. We focused on the 5 key areas where these barriers were consistently reported and where we could meaningfully explore change through design. These 5 key areas are station and stop design, noisy, bright, or crowded environments, seating and space inside vehicles, live travel information, and planning and booking journeys. Our next step was sharing a survey through ncat panel in which we asked how easy or difficult respondents find each of the 5 themes and why. Nearly 500 participants identifying themselves as disabled took part in this survey, and it helped us with 3 things. Firstly, to identify people who are happy to take part in our further research. Secondly, who those people are. What impairments do they have? What mobility aids do they use, if any, and their demographics? Thirdly, the survey also helped us to focus on 3 transport modes, such as buses, overground trains, and underground trains, like tube, because these are widely used and are also where disabled people told us they face some of the most persistent challenges. From the survey, we invited participants who were interested in taking part in more detailed conversations. We spoke with 50 disabled people. 34 people attended focus groups, 9 people took part in online interviews, and 7 people took part in in-person station or stop interviews. These conversations gave us a much richer and more personal understanding of what journeys are like day to day, what works, what doesn't, and what change could make difference. We took a pan-impairment approach to this work. The 50 user engagement participants represented a wide range of impairments, mobility aids, ages, and regions across the UK. We heard from people with mobility, sensory, and cognitive impairments, neurodivergence, long-term health conditions. Most people we spoke to experience more than one impairment at the same time. For example, mobility impairment alongside anxiety or sensory sensitivity alongside chronic pain. This gave us a much more realistic understanding of how barriers interact and overlap in everyday travel, and allowed the design opportunities to reflect the complexity of needs of different people. Across the survey and further in-depth engagement, we heard about many different experiences, but these cross-cutting themes were remarkably consistent. Firstly, people described the amount of planning and preparation required before traveling, such as checking routes, stop locations, staffing where applicable, live information, and if accessible facilities are present and working. This level of uncertainty means journeys often can't be spontaneous, and that limits independence. Secondly, we heard about the lack of adaptability and flexibility of physical environments, both in vehicles and on stations or stops. Interiors often don't allow for different ways of moving, resting, and traveling with mobility aids, leading to physical barriers and sometimes social friction. And lastly, and the last point is around information, expectations, and trust. Often people simply don't know what support or information is available, how to access it, and whether it will be reliable, as well as whether they will be believed, listened to, or supported if they ask for assistance. When support is inconsistent, travel can feel stressful even before the journey begins. So while some barriers are physical, many are emotional, social, and informational, and they are all interlinked with each other. Now I'm going to play a short video containing just a small part of what people told us.
It can make you anxious about booking a journey because you worry about the things that have gone wrong before, will they go wrong again?
Consider the second class systems. Information buses are just put an extra station to circulate, that's it. Don't design the whole thing for everybody to access.
I think sometimes people are concentrate on their day, they forget they're sat in a accessibility seat or that hasn't registered with them. And that's why I think it needs to be a bit more clearer.
The signage,
yeah. The area, and sort of like, either have a sign properly saying this is accessibility seat where the side of glass is maybe tinted into blue, the handle, if there's a glass barrier beside, tinted in there.
All of this brings us to the outputs of our work, 8 design opportunities. These are not solutions, they are clear evidence-based directions for where and how change is needed. Some opportunities focus on information and communication, including how live travel information is presented and how expectations between passengers and operators are set. Others address physical environments, like bus stops, bus interiors, and train stations. And some focus on services and social experience, such as improving the reliability of travel assistance, increasing awareness of diverse access needs, and identifying and scaling inclusive practices that already exist. Together, these cover the full journey from planning and waiting through boarding and traveling to interacting with staff and other passengers. To make these design opportunities more relatable, I'm going to look at some of them through one of the most common and essential travel experiences, a bus journey. We've ordered them to mirror the journey itself, from planning and preparing to getting to the bus stop or station, boarding, traveling, and interacting with others along the way. Each one reflects a different stage of that journey, and together they show how change needs to happen at every step. For each of them, we're going to tell what we heard from people, where the broad design opportunity lies, and what can be improved. Let's start with the design opportunity on improving existing assistance services. Planning a journey, often really in advance, for many disabled people starts with booking or using transport assistance. Although there are some great examples of assistance services for train travel, it is very different for bus journeys. For people we talked to, suggested that a single service bringing together booking, real-time information, staff presence information where applicable, and accessibility data across providers would be extremely useful. Also, knowing that there is a space for them on the bus in advance, whether it is a wheelchair area or priority seating, would give a peace of mind for many. The design opportunity here is around improving and expanding travel assistance services to give disabled passengers greater autonomy, confidence, and real-time control over their journeys. The potential areas for improvement are covering wider coverage of assistance service systems, potentially uniting all modes of public transport, real-time visibility and updates of assistance to have an option to see what's available, your bookings, confirmations of booked assistance, booking status, and any updates before and during journeys. Ability to contact assistance services at any moment and give feedback, which is especially relatable to the situations when the assistance is booked but nobody turns up. Next design opportunity is on bus stop accessibility. When getting to the bus station or stop, people described to us physical barriers, such as the absence of dropped curbs, which forced wheelchair users to travel to the next bus stop simply to be able to use one. Blind people or those with vision loss described barriers related to usage of floating bus stops and navigating unfamiliar environments, inconsistency of tactile markers, and unclarity of signage. People with mobility and vision impairments told about the barriers they face when using big transport hubs, when there are several bus stops in a row or many buses passing through one bus stop. Often there might be a queue of buses formed to the bus stop with dedicated boarding point and raised curb. But the scenario in which a bus stops in a random place in this situation is not rare, making it hard to board or to find the bus you need. The design opportunity here is around designing bus stops that are universally accessible, predictable, and informative for people with diverse impairments, so they can travel with autonomy, dignity, and confidence. The potential areas for improvement are related to consistency of bus stations and stops layout and boarding points, possibly an introduction of several boarding points for one bus stop in busy transport hubs, consistency of accessible built environment such as dropped curbs, lighting, and surfaces, as well as clarity of signage and consistency of tactile markers. When getting to a bus stop or station, next step for all of us would be to check when our bus is coming, which brings us to the next design opportunity on personalizing live travel information. One of the things we heard again and again was the need for reliable, clear, and personalized live travel information. Standard information systems often assume that a single format works for everyone, but for many of the people we spoke to, live information was sometimes hard to see, like in case with black and orange dotted text displays, or when the information boards are placed too high for somebody in a wheelchair to be able to see from a comfortable distance and without straining your neck. Sometimes people admitted that information on departure boards was changing too fast for them to be able to memorize it or to find the bits relatable to their journeys. Also, information might not be available in audio format for blind travelers, making it especially hard to identify if the coming bus is the one you need. Or audio announcements might not be available in visual format for those who struggle to hear or process audio information in a busy, crowded environment. Lastly, information can be simply inaccurate, which might have a disruptive effect on journeys. When information isn't accessible or reliable, confidence to travel can be lost, and in some cases, people avoid bus journeys altogether. The design opportunity here is around personalizing and improving access to live travel information so that disabled passengers can travel with greater confidence, clarity, and control over their journeys. The potential areas for improvement are related to availability of information in multiple formats, whether it is audio, visual, or tactile. Personalization options allowing to choose what information you access, how and where. For instance, what if a blind traveler could track the selected bus journey before and during it, receiving the updates through their headphones? Another area for improvement is related to reliability and consistency of updates across platforms for route changes and facilities condition, meaning providing timely information about any changes, which would allow enough time to change the planned journey. When a bus arrives, some of the people might require support from a bus driver to get onto the bus and to get safely to the wheelchair area or seating before a bus starts to move. Others might need bus drivers to let them know when their bus stop is coming, especially if there are no audio announcements in place. All of it brings us to the next design opportunity on clarifying operator-passenger commitments. There is a consensus between all of the people that we talked to that bus drivers' attitudes, proactiveness, and readiness to support disabled passengers when needed makes a huge difference. However, some of the bus drivers can be reluctant in providing assistance when asked to, as there is no shared understanding of what help passengers might expect. It makes the bus journeys experiences unpredictable. The design opportunity here is around designing clearer and more transparent ways for disabled passengers to understand what to expect from transport services and frontline staff, and for operators to communicate what they can reliably deliver. The potential areas for improvement are related to clarity of guaranteed commitments and assistance from transport operators and bus drivers, consistency of support provided, visibility of channels for communication and leaving feedback, and acknowledgement of good practice to reinforce inclusive behavior among transport operators and bus drivers. When getting on the bus and traveling, interiors inflexibility can pose barriers for travelers, which brings us to the next design opportunity on bus interiors flexibility and accessibility. People using mobility aids described that they feel stressed when getting on a bus and seeing a pram in the wheelchair space, meaning that they'll have to have a conversation to prove that they have a priority to use the area, and sometimes the drivers won't back them up. Other times, the wheelchair area might be already occupied by another passenger using mobility aid, meaning that you'll have to wait for the next bus with a blind hope that the wheelchair area won't be occupied on it. Some of the people mentioned that their partners also use mobility aids, meaning that often it is impossible for both of them to travel together on the same bus. Although some of the buses have 2 wheelchair spaces available, it is not a common practice, and often there is only 1 wheelchair area present. Maneuvering into the space with a mobility aid is another challenge due to the space constraints. There is also a requirement to secure a mobility aid and to travel facing away from the direction of movement, not being able to see a live information screen, feeling exposed to all the other passengers, and for some experiencing motion sickness. Blind travelers and those with vision impairments told us that the worst thing for them is to find a free seat and to take it before a bus starts to move. It's not easy, even for those who have guide dogs, as they are not trained to do that. The design opportunity here is around redesigning bus interiors to be more flexible, dignified, and intuitive for people with a range of impairments so they can travel safely, comfortably, and independently. The potential areas for improvement are related to flexibility of seating and spaces available and ability to adjust layouts in real time when needed. Visibility of live travel information when on board for all passengers. Positioning of stop buttons, handles, and rails within easy reach for all users, and reinforcing of priority use areas through clear design and easy reach to them. Going back to the point related to justifying the need for use of a wheelchair area, one of the key barriers which emerged from what people told us is around awareness of diverse travel needs, which brings us to the design opportunity with the same name. People with non-visible disabilities highlighted that often other passengers assume that they don't need the priority seating due to the fact that they look fine. Those with varied conditions described to us facing different public attitudes based on whether they used walking or mobility aids or not when traveling. Considering all the barriers disabled people might face at all the stages of their journeys already mentioned today, the need to explain yourself again and again can have a particularly emotionally draining effect. The design opportunity here is around raising public awareness of the diverse access needs of disabled passengers, including those with non-visible disabilities, to create a more respectful, empathetic, and equitable transport experience. The potential areas for improvement include public awareness of visible and non-visible impairments, promotion of respectful interactions, and a culture of empathy for all passengers and service providers, as well as recognition of discrete signs of disabilities such as sunflower lanyards. In a recent TfL Transport for All public campaign, passengers were reminded that not all disabilities are visible and to be considerate to others. I will now hand over to Keir to tell more about the summary of our work and what's next.
Thank you, Alessia. So in summary, this work began with listening to understand not just what the barriers are for disabled people, but how meeting these barriers to travel can make people feel and how these experiences shape people's day-to-day lives. We learned that accessibility isn't only about vehicle design and infrastructure, it's also about providing useful and timely information, delivering solutions that are predictable and build confidence. It's about enabling positive passenger and operator interactions, and the mental and emotional impact of traveling should not be overlooked. From there, we translated what we heard into the 8 design opportunities. These don't prescribe solutions, but provide clear, evidence-based directions for where and how change can happen across transport environments, services, systems, and interactions. Taken together, these opportunities highlight that improving accessibility means looking at the whole journey, and they show that the right focus and collaboration, meaningful change is absolutely possible. So what's next? The next step is to use these design opportunities. We'll be sharing them across the transport sector with operators, manufacturers, policy teams, and accessibility practitioners to help guide planning, investment, and service improvements. But change doesn't happen in isolation. It needs to be collaborative. That means transport partners working alongside disabled people as co-creators, not just as consultees. So developing, prototyping, and testing changes in real-world settings. Some improvements can be implemented in the short term, such as clearer travel information, more predictable assistance, or better use of space. And others will require longer-term system shifts, like designing more flexible vehicle interiors or ensuring consistent accessibility standards across regions and modes of transport. we feel this is a great opportunity to move from insight to action together. Each of the design opportunities is available on the project section of the ncat website, in the navigation menu below the heading What We Do. And this project is called Translating Research into Design Opportunities. You can also scan the QR code on screen now to go straight to the design opportunities. And we'd love to talk to you more about this work. So if you're a transport operator or manufacturer, local authority, national transport authority, you're involved with accessibility practice, in fact, anyone involved in providing transport solutions or interested in supporting this work going forward.
Great, thank you to Keir and Alessia for that. We've got a bit of time now for some questions and answers. We've had some pre-submitted at registration, so we're going to get to those now. So the first one, we've had quite a few questions during the sign-ups around how the National Centre for Accessible Transport works with disabled people during this project. Alessia, could you share a little bit more about how our Community for Accessible Transport, or CAT panel, works?
Sure, of course, Fee. So as it was already said, for all ncat work, we take a pan-impairment approach, meaning we involve people with a really wide range of experiences. And a key part of that is our CAT panel, the Community for Accessible Transport. It is a growing group of disabled advisors from across the UK who help shape our research, take part in different activities, and validate emerging ideas. And their involvement means the work stays grounded in real travel experiences and not assumptions. And alongside the CAT panel, we also engage directly with industry, like operators, manufacturers, service providers, advocacy groups, and policy leads, so that the ideas we develop are not only accessible and desirable for passengers, but also viable within the wider transport system. Keir, would you like to add anything to it?
Yeah, thank you, Alessia, and thank you, Fiona. One of the other questions we had, which was more specific about kind of when to engage and how to engage. If I read the question out that was submitted, I said, what benefits are there for disabled people being involved from the very earliest stages of the design and development process? And do you think there is a financial benefit to this? Both at designability and within ncat, we have disabled people very much at the centre of everything that we do. As Alessia has described, we do that via the Community of Accessible Transport. And although bringing about change in existing systems can be quite painful and time consuming, because those, I guess, an approach to inclusion and accessibility may not be sort of embedded, and that creates a challenge now. But if we shift towards solving some of these kind of systemic issues where accessibility is very much baked in from the very beginning, there's no reason why solutions should be any more expensive to deliver. So a big part of what ncat's doing is educating the transport sector and those stakeholders which operate in there, through demonstrating the benefits of involving the voices of disabled people. There's other projects at the moment looking at co-design and co-production, so that's very much having people involved at every stage, whether that's in product solutions themselves, whether that's in training of staff. So yeah, certainly in the short term, it will be harder because we're working with systems that perhaps haven't had that built in from the start. But looking forward into the future, if we can shift an approach towards accessibility being there from the very start, then there's no reason why it should cost any more. And then we also then benefit from the kind of economic impact, not just impact on individuals, but making more journeys. The reason that Motability Foundation funded ncat was because they did some research to demonstrate the gap in terms of the journeys that disabled people make compared to non-disabled people. It was 38%. So NCAT's very much there to try and well, not to try to change that, make more journeys, improve people's experiences of traveling, and therefore the things that they want to do in their day-to-day lives. Yeah. Any more questions, Fiona?
Yeah, so there were quite a few queries around influencing and changing policy. Is there something you'd like to share around how the National Centre for Accessible Transport plans to achieve this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so there's a couple of questions around like influencing legislation and making adjustments. Within NCAT, one of the partners is Policy Connect, and one of their roles within NCAT has been to launch and initiate the Accessible Transport Policy Commission, which is a cross-party group that meets, and that NCAT very much sees that as a mechanism towards taking the evidence that is generated, and being able to influence existing policies, future policies, standards, regulations, guidance, and do that in a way that's at an appropriate level. If I think of another project that Designability have worked on fairly recently, and in fact that's actually just had some coverage in the media because of some influence from Parliament, which was a standard for accessible EV charging. We worked on that with disabled people very much at the centre in terms of understanding what their requirements were, and what sat alongside our work, which was developing practical solutions that could be demonstrated to the EV charging industry, EV being electric vehicles, in terms of what good and what accessible and inclusive looks like. There was a British standard that sat alongside that. That's been live for 2 years now, and there's been some uptake in industry, but now Parliament have stepped in, and they've now passed a bill or a policy, I'm not quite sure of the terminology, which means that if industry are not responding to those requirements and that standard, then they will have now the powers to be able to step in and actually ensure that some of those that standard are actually not voluntary but become mandatory. So yeah, that's the kind of way in which NCAT will work. So generating evidence and then using those commissions to influence policy to the current government, but also other parties that may take up government in the future.
That's great. Thank you, Keir. I think we've probably got time for one more question. There was one that came through about ramp access for buses.
Yeah, sure. There's a couple on that actually. So the questions were, if I just find them, bear with me a second. Auto ramps on trains like buses. So yeah, two solutions in the train world. One is deploying a ramp, which has its issues. I mean, biggest one being that you are not able to independently board a train without that ramp being deployed. There are some system solutions within the rail industry whereby the platform and the train are level, and then there's an automated ramp, or not even a ramp really. It's just it's almost like a bridge, not a bridge. It bridges the gap between the platform and the train, which is quite small in that case. What it means is that's automatically deployed at every station. So as an individual, you can board and disembark that train without any assistance. So that's equality of boarding. So I think the question here is, can that kind of technology, that kind of solution be deployed in the bus sector? There's no reason why it can't be. It requires that communication between those operating buses and those building infrastructure. Many bus stops are kind of built up pavements, and buses, rather than have an automatic ramp, might do what they call where the bus actually lowers slightly. And so yeah, absolutely, NCAT would be advocating for bringing solutions from other sectors, and demonstrating best practice. It's actually something I wanted to touch on. Part of NCAT's work is to demonstrate and to showcase the good solutions that exist out in the transport sector, and to demonstrate that those technically, but also to communicate the impact that they can have on journeys in terms of more journeys made, taking part in more activities in day-to-day life, and the benefits of that, whether that be for the individual or for the activity that they're taking part in. I was actually at an event yesterday with Motability, just understanding all of the activity that was going on within the bus sector, which is there's a lot. And I know we've got someone on the call here from Lothian. Blackpool and Lothian as an operator were mentioned as an example of best practice. So ncat are really keen to hear from as many people as possible that have got examples of where things are working, where new solutions are being put in place and there's a positive impact. It's the role of ncat to build on our existing resource collection, which shares resources around accessible transport solutions, and to build that out into a really useful resource of best practice. And also when we also to ensure that those that are procuring solutions, whether it be buses or trains or other modes of transport, have the evidence and the requirements to request from their suppliers solutions that can meet the needs of every passenger.
Great, thank you, Keir. Do you think we could squeeze in one more question? Alessia's just flagged one, so we've got about 4 minutes left. So how do we make sure that designs work in real life? Often a solution works well in theory, but when passenger behaviour is considered, it doesn't work. An example of this is a wheelchair space dimensions being appropriate, but the turning space to access being compromised by shopping trolleys, for instance.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one, Alessia, unless you have a burning desire to respond to this one.
No, go for it.
Yeah, sure. Great question, really great question. And yeah, something that came up in the session yesterday, something that came up in that work I mentioned previously around accessible EV charging, and designability as an organization, whether we're working with an ncat, whether we're working on things outside of the transport sector, in other products in day-to-day life. It's really important that the needs of disabled people or of any user of a product are not just identified at the beginning of projects, but they're then used in product testing and validation. So no, and whoever's asked that question, I think you're right. There are sometimes requirements that are placed in standards or in legislation that perhaps don't have that kind of broader evidence base. So certainly that's the approach that ncat take, and it's absolutely looking at. One of the biggest challenges is looking at the needs of every passenger, be they disabled or not, and as Les just talked about, the kind of pan impairment, and it's our job then as kind of solution providers, or certainly those that are providing guidance, to be able to really scrutinize, test, and validate, so that anything that is making its way into a requirement or a specification for a product to be made, making its way into a standard or in a policy, has as much evidence as possible across passengers, operators, any stakeholder, in terms of ensuring that solutions are deliver the impact that they intend to, but also sustainable going forward. I think the classic one that comes up quite a lot in conversation at the moment is what can be referred to as floating bus stops, where bus stops have been where there's a cycle lane, bus stop, and is not sharing the space with a cycle lane, so it's kind of been placed on an island as such. And there was certainly the right intention when that was created, but I think particularly for visually impaired users, it's received quite a lot of, rightly so, negative feedback in terms of that solution doesn't work. So great example of needing to sort of do that rigorous testing. Because certainly in infrastructure projects, like a station platform or a bus stop, these are things that are there for a long time and are expensive to change. So coming back to the point earlier about when to involve people, disabled people in the process. It does take more time up front, but if things are delivered that are incorrect or that don't meet needs, the cost and the negative impact of that is felt for a long time. So to get things right at the beginning by the right level of engagement with all stakeholders is really important, and it's certainly what Designability and NCAT are advocating for and exist to do, is to make sure that that's at the very beginning.
That's great. Thank you, Keir, and thank you to Alessia. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. But if you have submitted questions that we didn't get to, we will follow up after the webinar by email. You're also welcome to find us via our website and contact us that way if you'd like to. But yes, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody. Great to see you. Take care.